your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us. Alberta's Justice Minister and Solicitor General Casey Madu made his way to the town of Cardston, Alberta this week to discuss the hot-button topic of rural crime and how it's handled in the province. Madu stressed making a change to a provincial force that would essentially phase out the current RCMP. Micah Quinn has the details.
A report was done by a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, that studied the potential for a provincial police force. Madu says the idea for a new force for Albertans comes from complaints from rural communities that said that they didn't have enough police presence on the ground.
A total of $286 million have been earmarked completely for more RCMP officers. And what I'm hearing right now again is that even is not enough. So where is this going to end?
Why?
So the need for us to really think through a new model. And based on the study that I have had the opportunity to take a look at, I am confident that we would have a more cost-effective police model.
The National Police Federation launched a campaign called Keep Alberta RCMP that says if the Alberta government disbands the RCMP, Canadian taxpayers will be on the hook for $160 million, as the federal government pays for about 30% of the RCMP's policing costs annually.
The vast majority of Albertans are not interested at all in pursuing a provincial police force. Recent polling has showed us that 81% of Albertans served by the RCMP are very satisfied with the service they receive. 78% in the rural north communities, 81% in the rural central communities, and 87% in the rural south communities. Those are incredible numbers. So I guess, the old adage goes, if it ain't broke, why are we trying to fix it?
The report from the PwC hasn't been made public yet, but Madu says he will let Albertans know when it's ready to be released. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That was Micah Quinn reporting. A new partnership between Alberta RCMP's regional crisis teams and Alberta Health Services has been created to help deal with and treat people who are suffering from mental health when arriving at an emergency call. As Carson Marzouk reports, the new initiative has already begun successfully in the northern part of the province.
A new initiative to provide the right care for someone suffering with mental health has been launched by the Alberta RCMP in partnership with Alberta Health Services. When responding to a call, an officer with the crisis team will be partnered up with a mental health therapist from AHS who will respond to calls across Alberta.
The vast majority of the mental health apprehensions are people who actually need to be in hospital and will be kept for treatment. Whereas as police officers, we're not always able to judge that, and sometimes we would err on the side of caution.
Staff Sergeant with the Alberta RCMP Community Policing Unit, Colette Zazalak, says over the past few years they have seen an increase in people suffering from mental health issues and are hoping the new initiative will provide better care when officers are responding to a call.
Unfortunately, we have, and this was even increasing prior to COVID, and then of course with COVID, everyone isolated, and it just kind of exacerbated some underlying issues for people.
According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, in any given year, 1 in 5 people in Canada will experience a mental health problem. In 2020, there were over 20,000 files with the Alberta RCMP relating to mental health. Zazalak says they are hoping to keep the new program for as long as possible.
No intention of them leaving. They relieve a lot of the burden both on the frontline responding members and the hospital emergency departments.
The initiative is a 3-year implementation plan that has started in northern Alberta and is expected to make its way to southern Alberta in roughly 2 years. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marzouk.
Thank you, Carson. The province announced more funding to improve mental health services for Alberta's youth. Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions Mike Ellis was joined by Children's Services Minister Rebecca Schultz in Medicine Hat on Tuesday to announce $7.3 million over 3 years to expand mental health hubs across Alberta.
We're planning on having 12 hubs provincially, 8 hubs currently in operation. 4 hubs are being planned and implemented as we speak.
And on the lighter side, officials with the Calgary Stampede have declared this year's event a success despite attendance numbers taking a major hit. They say attendance numbers averaged around 50,000 people. Officials say 73% of attendees were Calgarians, 13% were from other areas of Alberta, and 12% were from other areas of the country. They say they were proud to host the Stampede as the first large-scale event in Alberta, not to mention the country, since the start of the pandemic. Coming up, we tell you how newborn babies will be screened for rare genetic conditions in the province. But first, a quick break. Welcome back. Muscular Dystrophy Canada is providing $366,000 to Alberta Precision Laboratories to begin screening newborns for spinal muscular atrophy. SMA is a rare genetic condition that causes muscle weakness. The test, which is part of a one-year pilot initiative, will be added to Alberta's newborn metabolic screening program, which currently screens newborns for 21 different conditions. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says early detection will help babies with SMA have more of a fighting chance.
Over the next 6 months, Alberta Precision Labs, now under Dr. Bullman's leadership, will be completing its work to develop a trusted, quality screening test, making Alberta only the second province in Canada to screen newborns for spinal muscular atrophy.
Prior to newborn screening and treatments, infants born with SMA often didn't make it to their second birthday. The evidence is clear. The earlier the diagnosis, the greater the opportunities and choice in treatment and supportive care. Newborn screening gives families the opportunity to make important healthcare decisions earlier and gives every child a chance to realize their developmental potential.
Alberta Seniors and Housing Minister Josephine Pon was in Lethbridge earlier this week to discuss the launch of 2 housing projects in the city, including an Indigenous Peoples housing unit and affordable housing that will give seniors who are living with mixed income a place to call home. As Carson Marzouk explains, the development was a much-needed investment in the city.
Shovels are in the ground and dirt has been moved to make way for 64 new homes for seniors with a mixed income living in Lethbridge. Alberta Seniors and Housing Minister Josephine Pon was in Lethbridge on Wednesday to help break the ground.
Home for Albertan is important. As affordable housing minister, this is my job to make sure that we have enough affordable housing. We're trying at least that reduce the people on the wait list, and as well as build enough affordable housing for Albertans who most in need.
This model will see residents paying rent at a rate that made sense for their individual situations, allowing them to be financially stable over the coming years. The new development is in collaboration with the private sector, nonprofit sector, and different orders of government, including the Lethbridge Housing Authority.
Lethbridge Housing Authority is thankful for the support from the federal and provincial government with their investment of $3.4 million in mixed market seniors housing here in Lethbridge.
The new space located along Southgate Boulevard will be pet-friendly, have multiple walking paths, located close to shopping centers, and will have access to the Cooley Creek Park across the street. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf says the housing is long overdue for the city.
One of our biggest challenges as one of the central communities in southern Alberta, with all of the other amenities that we have, we find a lot of seniors relocating to Lethbridge and cities like this for their retirement. Just ease of shopping, ease of transport, and now affordable housing as well.
The project will create about 91 jobs and is anticipated to be completed in early 2022. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marzouk.
Well, you could say it was the week for funding announcements in the province. On Thursday, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced that his government would be investing over $100 million to improve broadband in both rural and Indigenous communities.
Right now, about 80% of Indigenous communities don't have access to reliable internet in our province. Roughly 67% of rural communities cannot rely on a stable internet connection. And this just is no longer acceptable. Access to broadband must help these Alberta communities continue to grow and participate in our economic recovery. So I am very excited to be here to announce that as a key part of Alberta's economic recovery plan, Alberta's government is dedicating at least $150 million to connect Albertans in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities to high-speed internet, to broadband, to the digital economy.
Premier Kenney added that around 201,000 Alberta households, or around 12% of the population, don't have access to target speeds set by the CRTC. Justice Minister Casey Madu has written to the federal government saying that he would like to see Albertans being allowed to carry pepper spray as a legal way of protecting themselves. Currently, pepper spray is a prohibited weapon in Canada unless you're a police officer. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says Madu feels pepper spray would help protect many who are most vulnerable in the larger centers.
Casey Madu, as you say, has written to the federal justice minister asking that this rule be changed. Looking at some of the attacks against vulnerable people that we've seen in Alberta in the last little while, and basically arguing that this should be a self-defense option for people, walking the streets of major cities and whatnot.
Stay with us. We'll have more with Tyler after this short break. Should Albertans be allowed to carry pepper spray for self-defense? Alberta's Justice Minister Casey Madu seems to think so. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson chatted with Hal Roberts this week about this and more. Take a look.
Now, Minister Madu, Tyler, is touring the province right now, including right here in southern Alberta, to hear about rural crime and get some feedback on what the government has done so far to improve response times. He will also be updating us on a study to potentially replace the RCMP with a provincial police force.
The rural crime issue is really the issue that never seems to end in Alberta politics. I mean, I feel like we kind of haven't talked that much about it over the course of the pandemic, but if we think back to the 2019 election and right before that and right after that, there was considerable conversation about rural crime. And Madu clearly, now that the pandemic is easing, is getting back into some of those files to discuss it. The provincial police force is a notable one because of the RCMP union, which is really pushing quite hard to keep the RCMP in Alberta. The RCMP police is geographically probably the majority of Alberta, but certainly not the majority of the population. But it is a proposal that's out there, and this is part of this sort of idea from the Fair Deal panel that there should be institutions that are more responsive to the concerns that Albertans might have, and perhaps a provincial police force would be a better way to tackle some of the concerns that rural communities in particular have.
Casey Madu has written to the federal government asking that Albertans be allowed to carry pepper spray in self-defense. Tyler, last time I checked, though, pepper spray was a prohibited weapon in Canada unless you're a police officer.
Ball's in the federal government's court, of course, on whether or not they would go ahead and make a change like this. But, I think it's interesting in the context of a presumably upcoming federal election, whether or not some of these ideas that the UCP has might not be picked up by their contemporaries, perhaps, in the federal Conservative Party, who I think it would be fair to say have seemed a little light on big ideas in the last little while. And so maybe the UCP is doing a little bit of that heavy lifting for them.
Now, Tyler, we've had a very dry, hot summer so far, and we've seen a lot of drought here in the West, especially here in southwestern Alberta. Many farmers are hurting. Now, the province is working with Ottawa on a new initiative to help our producers called the Agra Recovery Program. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a cost sharing program basically to sort of help out farmers get to the end of the season. And the way it would work is sort of 60% of costs of the program would be borne by the federal government, 40% by the province. Details on this are quite slim. Agriculture Minister Devin Dreeshen mentioned it recently. And clearly they're working on something. And there's also some discussion, I believe, about whether or not some crop insurance estimates are going to happen earlier than normal because people already are dealing with failing crops and trying to decide about whether or not, they're just going to turn them over for animal feed. So, it's been a very rough season for farmers across Alberta. And I mean, it's still early, mid-late July. and already people are looking at failing crops. So doubtless there's going to be some sort of provincial federal government action on that in the coming days or weeks, I would expect. But at this point, details are fairly thin on that front.
Coal mining is back in the news, Tyler. Opposition leader Rachel Notley would like to see new legislation passed to ban coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies. Meanwhile, the Piikani First Nation and Benga Mining are seeking an appeal of the decision to shut down the Grassy Mountain Coal Project. Tell me more about that.
That's right. So they are basically seeking an appeal on that decision, saying that there are economic reasons why the First Nation wants it, and going through that sort of process, looking to see what the steps are. But of course, on the political side, I feel like we talk about this every couple of weeks. The coal mining thing is still a very tense political issue that, of course, has brought in country music stars like Corb Lund and Paul Brand to discuss it, pitted sort of the UCP government against small town mayors for a little period of time there back in the spring, I suppose it was. And Rachel Notley, the NDP had previously proposed a ban on coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and that didn't really go anywhere before the sort of spring session of the legislature ended. But she has now promised that, when the legislature comes back in the fall, she's going to attempt to bring forward a ban of that sort. Again, seems like a very politically salient topic right now for people all across the province, and also, building some interesting bridges between small town rural Albertans and New Democrats in the cities. So that's going to be one, I think, to watch for sure once normal returns and once politicians are back at it in the fall.
Up next, Canadians may be excited to start traveling again, but there are some important rules that you need to follow before you get back to Canada, or else you may still have to quarantine, whether you're vaccinated or not. That's coming up after the break. With the border rules changing practically monthly, what will the tourism industry look like as we finish out the summer season? Right now, fully vaccinated Canadians can travel out of the country and return without quarantining, but only if they follow some very specific rules. And some of those instructions aren't so clear. Earlier this week, I was joined by Tracy Hamilton with Inspired Vacations to discuss this further. Take a look. So Tracy, welcome and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be able to talk about travel again.
First of all, Tracy, how different do you think tourism will look this summer compared to last, particularly with the border loosening up some of its restrictions, at least for vaccinated Americans coming to Canada? Have you heard anything? What are Americans wanting to see when they come to Canada?
In the West, certainly a very important thing that they come to do is see the Rockies. So I expect that there will be an influx coming up our way. That would be one. And then Ontario is another area that's, very popular and easy for the Americans to get to. So I think they will be very excited with the news that's just come out this week.
What about going the other way for Canadians traveling south? Do you think more Canadians will travel south now that more people are double vaccinated?
One of the pieces that is a little bit frustrating, particularly for a number of people, in the Lethbridge and southern Alberta area, is the fact we still can't drive over. So, we know lots of people have properties in Montana and Idaho and such. And so that still makes it difficult for them. But I think that people are looking at the US as kind of that spot where we feel safe and comfortable going. So I do have people flying down.
Something Canadians maybe need to still be aware of is that I believe some of the airlines are still requiring that negative PCR test to board the plane to go south. So is this still the case, at least for the next little while? I know the news changes constantly with this.
It truly changes, if not daily, certainly weekly. And right now, I was reading, yes. So as of August 9th, Americans are welcome in. September 7th, international, again, doubly vaxxed people with vaccines that are approved in Canada are coming. And then for us going, though, yes, most definitely we have to have that negative PCR test within 72 hours of travel.
Yeah, and these tests aren't cheap either, depending on where you live. Sometimes they're up to $150. And also, Canadians need to be aware that Canada border guards are still requiring those PCR tests taken within 72 hours prior to arrival in Canada. So do we know how much longer that's going to go on for? Have you heard anything, Tracy?
No, on that side of we don't. I do know, I just read an article this morning that spoke exactly to the expense of those tests, because it's one thing if you're on your own or a couple, but a family traveling, that can be a significant additional cost when you're doing that. So yeah, they're most certainly now looking at how can we get the cost of those tests down if we do still have to do
I
the
know,
tests.
because they can be hundreds if you're spending $150 to go down, and then you have to find another test down there. You're looking at adding extra of hundreds of dollars to your travel budget. And then, you know, something else too, I know of a family who was fully vaccinated. They went down to the US, but they weren't aware that they had to download that Arrive Can app prior to coming back to Canada, and they were told to quarantine, even though they were all fully vaccinated. So they just thought they'd have to show their vaccine records at the border, but that's not the case at all. So I think this is really important that all traveling Canadians need to be aware of. What I'm hearing is that you have to have the whole thing filled out before you even arrive. And then there's some sort of a code that you show the border guard, he scans it. So he's not going to wait for you to fill out all the information. He'll just tell you to go on and go quarantine for 2 weeks. So we want to avoid that, especially if we're fully vaccinated. That completely defeats the purpose right there.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah. We want to be able to come home and just, when we're vaxxed, we're thinking that makes it easy.
Yeah.
So we need to do whatever the government wants to
we
make
just
it that
we
way.
just want life to get back to normal. Where can people find that information that they're looking for, or find that app for that matter?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the one website that has all of that information is travel.gc.ca. So that's our Canadian website. It's updated regularly with every new piece that happens. And I would also encourage people work with a travel advisor.
Tracy Hamilton of Inspired Vacations, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Jeanette.
Coming up after the break, we bring you some of the top stories from around southern Alberta. Stay with us.
These planned new rental units are an investment in a promising future for Indigenous women and their families.
Another candidate has thrown their hat into the ring to become the next mayor of Lethbridge this October. Two-term former city councillor Bridget Mearns made it official on Thursday that she is gunning to become our city's first woman mayor. Kirsten Marzouk has the story.
A well-known name in Lethbridge is vying for the mayor's chair. Bridget Mearns entered the race on Thursday afternoon. If elected, Mearns would become the first female mayor out of 25 in Lethbridge.
My Lethbridge is not defined by our problems, but rather our riches and diversity, culture, trails and parks, world-class post-secondary opportunities, a resilient and supported local economy, and pride in all we are and who we can be.
About 50 people joined Mearns at her announcement in support of her decision to run for mayor. Mearns says her goal is to make change in the community.
And I watched the last council, and I listened to the people of the city who reached out to me to tell me they were tired of a divisive council, tired of progress slowing division created in our city. They wanted change, and they wanted to get things done. I saw there was something I have to offer, and now is the time for me to make that offer to the citizens of Lethbridge. I want to be their mayor.
Mearns has served as a city councillor for 2 terms before becoming the executive officer of Build. If elected, Mearns is dedicating to addressing and tackling homelessness, the opioid crisis, and community safety by collaboration rather than confrontation, with clear objectives and accountability. As well, Mearns says she will support local businesses after a tough year in the pandemic by removing barriers to grow. Another key point made by Mearns is quality of life.
I share their vision of a celebrated city with a high quality of life. A city that attracts new businesses and skilled professionals, employs our post-secondary graduates, grows our economy and builds on the success of our agricultural and tech sectors.
Mearns is the 6th candidate to file their nomination papers for mayor ahead of the October 18th election. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marsouk.
More good news for Indigenous women living in Lethbridge. The Alberta and federal governments announced new funding for 14 safe and stable housing units for Blackfoot women and their children who are relocating from the Kainai, Siksika, and Piikani reserves. These women may be starting new jobs, attending school, fleeing difficult circumstances, or just looking for a safe and stable place to call home.
The Blackfoot Family Lodge Society, you're like a family and community for the First Nations women and children. These planned new rental units are an investment in a promising future for Indigenous women and their families. Everyone deserves a safe, affordable, and accessible home.
Both levels of government will provide $3.4 million for the new housing located on the north side of Lethbridge. The project is also expected to create 25 jobs. In a separate announcement, the province says it will also allocate close to $8 million to support Indigenous-led efforts to support the mental health of residential school survivors and their families. A unique program was underway once again to help grow positive interactions between kids and first responders in the Lethbridge area. The Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Lethbridge matched children with volunteers and members of the Colehurst Fire Department and Lethbridge Police Service to allow for connections to form with our first responders. As Micah Quinn explains, this was the 20th year for the Kids in Cops program.
The executive director for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Lethbridge, Jen Visser, says this program wants children to know that they have a circle of trust they can confide in.
There are so many kids in our community who just need that friend, and the commitment to be a big brother or big sister isn't as much as what people may think it is. A couple hours a week, and you're forming a relationship that isn't going to just change today, it's going to change so much into the future. Our services are prevention. It's you know, as these kids grow up, they make better choices, and they have more potential for their future.
Kids were given a special tour today of the Colehurst Fire Hall as part of the Kids in Cops program. Organizers from the Lethbridge Police Service say this is a great way for police officers to have positive interactions with the kids.
A lot of times we found that their first interactions with police have maybe been on the more negative side, and we want to make sure that they have a positive experience with us, show that we're just regular people just like them, and we're here to help them whenever we can. A lot of times what we'll do is show up in uniform like we are today for the first day, so they can see what the uniform looks like, ask us some questions about the gear we have in policing in general, and then after that we'll kind of just be plain clothes, just regular, and we just like to have a lot of fun. We do some presentations with them as far as internet safety, drug identification and safety and stuff like that, and then we just have some fun with them in the community.
The Kids in Cops program runs this week from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., Monday to Friday. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Up next, tackling world poverty, but first, a quick break.